Welcome to Friday's edition of Everything Yesterday This Morning. Thank goodness it's Friday. Big day yesterday as opposed to the day before. The Department of Homeland Security has announced their Disinformation Governance Board, aka the Ministry of Truth, while testifying before Congress this week. Mayorkas called disinformation a threat that needs to be addressed with federal law enforcement power. The Department of Homeland Security has pointed to disinformation given to migrants as well as Russian disinformation. Something tells me that that's not all they're thinking about. What or who constitutes a threat will be determined by the federal government. That's a big problem. Senator Marco Rubio said they're basically going to be focused on misinformation. So instead of stopping drugs from coming into America or securing the border, stopping illegal immigration, they're not going to be focused on that. They're going to be focused on policing speech, on making sure that people cannot share information or say things that they decide is misinformation. I have to hearken back to an article that I wrote in February 10th, I believe, and just take this moment to say I told you so, which is not traditionally what I like to do, but I'm just over here tapping my sign saying, pay attention. Those concerns were heightened when news broke that Nina Jankowicz announced she will be serving as the Biden administration information czar, helping shape our counter-disinformation efforts. Critics were quick to point out that Jankowicz's remarks about the Hunter Biden laptop story and disinformation. The laptop story has become a focal point in the debate over censorship, particularly on social media, as evidence has increasingly verified many parts of that story that were labeled as misinformation and censored by mainstream and social media platforms in the weeks before the 2020 presidential election. Her direct quote about the laptop was misinformation. Quote, back on the laptop from hell, apparently, Biden notes 50 former NatSec officials and 5 former CIA heads that believe the laptop is a Russian influence operation. And she posted this during the election. So she was literally the problem and is now the solution? Her defense is that she was live tweeting the presidential debate and that she cannot be held responsible for putting that information out there. You will not be surprised to find that Jankowicz advised the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry on its communication strategy as part of the Fulbright Public Policy Fellowship, which was formerly known as the Fulbright Clinton Public Policy Fellowship. She also oversaw democracy outreach programs in Russia and Belarus, while working at the National Democratic Institute. She also wrote a book, How to Lose the Information War, Russia, Fake News, and the Future of Conflict, and How to Be a Woman Online, Surviving Abuse and Harassment, and How to Fight Back. One of the quotes in this book is, to be a woman online is an inherently dangerous act. So she's the Taylor Lorenz of the government. Great. The prologue of her first book says, quote, election meddling wasn't the only reason Donald Trump won the 2016 election, but it was a significant contributing factor. And wrote that Trump used the term fake news to describe any narrative that they find politically inconvenient. Funny, your administration is using mis- and disinformation for any information or narrative that you find politically inconvenient. The difference is you are weaponizing it. Donald Trump did not. Ahead of the 2020 election, she authored an op-ed in The Atlantic titled, quote, Trump's version of poll watching sounds like thuggery. This was in response to a November 2021 report about Trump allies endorsing supporters to fill local election board seats throughout the country, and retweeted her op-ed with the caption, "Yep, sadly, I feared this would happen when the Trump campaign injected violence into election observation last year. Now, far from just sending observers, they're infecting the process itself." And the really fun one, that while all those mostly peaceful riots were taking place in the Portland, Oregon area, she tweeted, "Trump talking about how he would put out that fire in Portland is the language of authoritarianism. It means the violent clearing of protesters, arrest without cause, abuse of human rights. That's not law enforcement, that's lawlessness. This administration cannot continue to control you if you continue to have access to alternative information. So they're just going to shut down alternate means of communication and information. If they do not define what disinformation or misinformation is, they can police anything they don't like in the name of their cause." This is incredibly frustrating, and why I spend so much time on it, because I find it incredibly important. A week after announcing $800 million in military assistance and $500 million in economic aid, Biden has called on Congress yesterday to pass an additional $33 billion in aid for Ukraine. Slava Ukraina, shouts all the NPCs pretending they serve the citizens of the United States. Psaki told reporters that Biden will send a formal request to Congress by the end of the week. She added that funding would be enough to support Ukraine through the end of the year. The Biden administration unveiled a legislative package yesterday that would, if allowed to pass, allow it to liquidate assets seized from Russian oligarchs supporting the Kremlin's invasion and use the proceeds to support Ukraine. So we're stealing yachts from private citizens to contribute to the war that we shouldn't be participating in. Can't make this shit up. The breakdown would be $20 billion in security assistance, including $5 billion for weapons and other military aid, $6 billion for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. Wonder what that is. $4 billion for the State Department's Foreign Military Financing Program. Additionally, Biden is asking Congress to approve $8.5 billion more in economic assistance for Ukraine and $3 billion in humanitarian assistance and food security funding, he said. We, like he's a fucking member of Ukraine, need this bill to support Ukraine in the fight for freedom. Meanwhile, I'm going to institute a ministry of truth and take freedom away from Americans. The cost of this fight is not cheap, but caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen. Yeah, because you're not fucking paying for it. Biden is also asking for $500 million to address domestic and international economic stresses related to the war that will go toward helping the U.S. increase production of wheat and other food crops experiencing shortages. And the funding would help officials use the Defense Production Act to boost domestic production of critical minerals affected by the war, or, and here's a novel fucking concept, remove all U.S. involvement in foreign conflict. Let them sort out their own affairs and stop fighting proxy wars. Russian state TV hosts discussed the possibility of a war that expands outside of Ukraine on Tuesday, and Margarita Simonyan, the head of RT, told viewers that a nuclear war would be okay because we're all going to die someday. Russian television has consistently discussed the idea of a war spreading beyond Ukraine, promoting the idea of an inevitable war against Europe and the world. On Tuesday night's show, Vladimir Solovyov said that in order to stop other countries from intervening in Russia's war with Ukraine, a nuclear war would have to be a possibility. She said, "Personally, I think that the most realistic way is the way of the World War III, based on knowing us and our leader, Vladimir Putin, knowing how everything works around here. It's impossible. There is no chance we will ever give up. Everything will end with a nuclear strike is more probable than the other outcome. This is to my horror on one hand, but on the other hand, with the understanding that it is what it is." And Solovyov said, "But we will go to heaven while they will simply croak." And Simonyan said, "We're all going to die someday." Undiscussed in our own mainstream media, Putin said in a speech on Wednesday that any countries attempting to intervene and create, quote, "unacceptable threats for us that are strategic in nature" would be met with a lightning fast response. Solovyov discussed Western artillery deliveries being made to Ukraine and questioned, "What is preventing us from striking the territory of the United Kingdom, targeting those logistical centers where those arms are being loaded?" Another guest on the show, Andrei Sidorov, the deputy dean of world politics at Moscow State University, replied, "If we decide to strike the United Kingdom, we should rather decide to strike the United States. Final decisions are being made not in London, but in Washington. If we want to hit the real center of the West, then we need to strike Washington, but, you know, we're fine. Everything's fine. Keep funding Ukraine. Keep poking that bear. Meanwhile, let us be sure to use the proper pronouns and allow teachers to talk about sex with 5-year-olds. Gross domestic product shrank at a 1.4% annual rate as strong demand drew a flood of imports. This is well below the 1% growth that economists were expecting. It marked the first quarterly decline in activity since the spring of 2020, when the pandemic-related shutdowns triggered mass layoffs that plunged the economy into a brief but deep recession. The surprise brings a major messaging challenge for the White House that is grappling with waning consumer confidence despite months of strong job gains. Rapid wage increases and declining layoffs. They keep talking about these wage increases. I don't know if they're talking about stimulus. I did not get a wage increase. As a matter of fact, my wages decreased over the course of the last 2 years. It comes after GDP grew at a blistering 6.9% pace in the last 3 months of 2021. Oh, I don't know, because that was Thanksgiving and Christmas. And less than a week before the Fed is expected to accelerate its efforts to raise interest rates to curb inflation, which may further slow growth. Perhaps another novel concept: we should abolish the Federal Reserve and allow the free market to flourish without levers being pulled and manipulated by a central bank. I know, crazy conspiracy theories over here. A Gallup poll release said 4 in 5 adults rated current economic conditions as only fair or poor, and more than 3/4 of Americans say the economy is getting worse. Demand was so strong, the domestic production couldn't keep up, forcing businesses to import more goods from overseas. This is what an overheating economy looks like. But a single quarter of negative growth does not mean that the United States is in a recession. That determination is made by a panel of experts at the National Bureau of Economic Research and factors in data over many months. The FDA pushes ahead with a move to ban menthol cigarettes. For decades, menthol cigarettes have been in the crosshairs of anti-smoking groups who have argued that they contribute to a disproportionate health burden on Black communities and play a role in luring young people into smoking. Menthol cigarettes banned in many states, including California, and Massachusetts account for more than a third of the industry's overall market share in the United States, even as overall smoke rates have been declining in the country. The FDA said modeling studies have estimated a 15% reduction in smoking within 40 years if menthol cigarettes were banned. The public can submit their comments from July 5th to from May 5th to July 5th, and the agency will decide whether to issue a final ruling after reviewing them, because the government always cares to hear what you have to say and adheres to the public interest. I just, I can't even. You are not capable of making smart decisions for yourself, and menthol cigarettes is the problem. Like, people know smoking is fucking bad for them. They at least want it to taste good. You can't stop them. It's, okay. The United States House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed legislation on Thursday that will make it easier to export military equipment to Ukraine, reviving the Lend-Lease Act that helped defeat Hitler. Nice way to garner support by comparing the Russia-Ukraine war by throwing in the defeat of Hitler as a method by which to get people to think it's good. Good job, propaganda machine. The House passed the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act of 2022 by a vote of 417 to 10, 3 weeks after it sailed through the Senate with unanimous support. It's now on its way to the White House to be signed into law. The measure revives a World War II-era program that allowed Washington to lend or lease military equipment to U.S. allies. In this case, it will help those affected by Russia's invasion, such as Poland and other Eastern European countries, as well as Ukraine. Among other provisions, the bill would allow the United States to provide equipment to Ukraine now with just a technical requirement to pay at some later date, essentially giving it to the Kyiv government. Essentially, Congress just authorized Biden to transfer virtually any weapon of war other than a nuclear weapon to Ukraine. I wonder if U.S. troops are considered weapons of war. Did Congress just formally declare war on Russia with this legislation? Oh, the tangled webs we weave. This and more will be discussed this evening on my live Liberty Happy Hour on Twitter Spaces. You are welcome to join me. Outside of that, I hope you guys have a great weekend. Like, share, subscribe, do all the things. I hope you guys take care. Thank you so much for listening. Mwah.